Today's story is a powerful example of how sometimes things can intersect in history in unexpected ways. And as a warning, we're going to be dealing with the 1881 assassination of United States President James Garfield, but not in a gruesome or graphic way. Still, I wanted you to know. In the days of my youth, I didn't see many metal detectors, whether the walk-through security kind or the portable ones that are used in treasure seeking. So it might seem that that's a fairly recent invention. And when we hear the name of Alexander Graham Bell, I suspect that most of us immediately think of him as the inventor of the telephone. On the surface, these two topics might seem unconnected, but in this story, we're going to explore how they converged in 1881 when Bell brought a metal detector into the White House. Let's find out more. Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to History Heights. I'm Gail Macinda. By some accounts, Alexander Graham Bell, known as Alec to his inner circle, invented the metal detector. That might not be entirely accurate. Like other inventors and scientists, one person would build on the ideas or technologies of those who came before, and that's what happened here. I want to mention two men who did a lot of the heavy lifting that laid the groundwork for the metal detector. First up was the highly successful Heinrich Wilhelm Dove, a German physicist and meteorologist. Among his other achievements, it was Dove who developed the theory of rotation, an explanation of why tropical cyclones rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere, but clockwise in the southern. In 1841, Professor Dove published an invention he called the differential inductor. This was the first magnetic induction metal detector and the first pulse induction metal detector. Also, there was David Edward Hughes, a music professor and inventor who was born in Britain, raised in Kentucky, and later moved back to Britain. He excelled as a musician, even from a very young age, but had a real passion for inventing. Hughes invented the first telegraph that could print text on paper tape, which he appropriately called the Hughes telegraph. He also published his initial work that led to the microphone, but he never patented it, thinking it should be made publicly available for development by others. Thomas Edison was also working on the development of a microphone, but he had a different business plan. In late 1878 and into 1879, Hughes published his experiments with a four-coil induction balance, another type of metal detector. And all that brings us up to Alexander Graham Bell. Now, we'll talk more about Bell's invention in a moment because first we need to back up and talk about James Abram Garfield, the 20th President of the United States. The 1880 Republican National Convention was held in Chicago in the Interstate Industrial Exposition Hall, a marvelous structure built in 1872, right after the Great Chicago Fire. At that time, James Garfield was the senator-elect from Ohio and a well-known Republican, having served 9 terms in the House of Representatives. He was a large man with a booming voice and known as an engaging, enthusiastic speaker. He was at the convention to give a speech supporting one of the presidential nominees. Garfield himself was not a candidate. For 2 days of the convention, Ulysses Grant led the balloting for electoral votes, but never had enough votes to secure the nomination. Then someone nominated Garfield. He really tried to tamp down the support for his nomination, but the enthusiasm quickly rose. And on the 36th ballot, James Garfield won the nomination, even though he never even agreed to have his name on the ballot. And as we now know, he went on to win the general election to become the 20th President of the United States. He was inaugurated on March 4th, 1881. About 4 months later, on the morning of July 2nd to be exact, the now President Garfield was headed out of town for some eagerly anticipated family time. While he was waiting to board a train at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C., he was shot in an assassination attempt, once in the arm and once in the back. The assailant thought Garfield should have appointed him to a diplomatic position. Garfield survived the initial gunshots and was taken back to the White House. Doctors believed they needed to find that bullet so they could remove it. And they tried searching for it by probing with their unsterilized hands and medical instruments. And they were unsuccessful. And this is where Alexander Graham Bell comes in. Just 34 years old, Bell knew of the inventions we talked about earlier and had a laboratory in Washington, D.C., which he called the Volta Laboratory. Bell's assistant and colleague, Charles Sumner Tainter, was working at the Volta Laboratory when he received news of Garfield's shooting. The message came to Tainter by another one of Bell's inventions, the telephone. Bell himself was in Boston at the time with his family, and they were expecting their third child. When he heard the news about Garfield, however, his mind immediately switched from his current work to the president. Bell knew the importance of finding the location of that bullet too, but he felt that science would do a better job than the doctor's fingers and probes. At first he thought a bright light might work, but soon realized that a small bullet would not be visible in a thick body cavity. He knew what he needed. It was a metal detector. Bell thought of an invention he patented earlier in the year in England. It was used to reduce interference in telegraph wires. Now thinking of Garfield's condition, he believed this technology could be modified to create an induction balance, another type of metal detector. The doctor who had taken charge of Garfield's case was Dr. D. Willard Bliss. Many medical professionals strongly criticized Bliss's treatment of Garfield, but he would not budge on many of his questionable decisions. Since Bliss was the man in charge, however, Bell offered to help him find the bullet. Bliss, who notably ignored science on other occasions, did recognize Bell's fame and had grown concerned over the president's worsening condition. 2 weeks after the shooting, Bell went to Washington while his wife remained in Boston. He went directly to the White House. Bell labored over his induction balance for days. He consulted with other scientists too, including David Hughes. Bliss brought 2 bullets to the Volta laboratory, and Bell successfully demonstrated how his new device could find those bullets. A big problem was that the induction balance could only find bullets about an inch deep. Bell continued his work and modifications and finally got it up to 2 inches. But he was concerned that Garfield's bullet was even deeper. Bliss posted daily updates on Garfield's condition. Newspapers around the world ran headlines of the president's improvement based on Bliss's updates. Even when Garfield's condition was poor, Bliss posted more positive updates. And the doctors and surgeons he had handpicked to help him were expected to sign off on these updates too, whether or not they had actually examined the president. Bliss also kept visitors away from Garfield. Only a few friends and family members who actually served as nurses were permitted. This was especially difficult for the very outgoing and talkative Garfield. On July 26th, Bliss asked Bell to come to the White House to use his new machine on the president. Bell made some last-minute modifications to make the sound stronger. Could only hope that it was now going to be enough. After setting up the device, Bliss, not Bell, ran the induction balance coils where he expected the bullet to be. The machine was working, but made a strange sound. The president was tiring, so they had to stop. Bell was disappointed and worried. Not only was the life of the president at stake, but Bell knew that if his induction balance didn't work, it would harm his reputation. The next day, Bell discovered the problem and fixed it. He made more modifications, and now his detection range was up to 5 inches. On July 30th, Bell was asked to come back to the White House for a second attempt to find that bullet. Before he did, however, he tried his invention on a Civil War soldier who had been living in a nearby soldier's home. That man had a bullet in his body for nearly 20 years. Bell's induction balance found it. So, his confidence restored, Bell went back to the White House on August 1st. This time, Bell was permitted to conduct the experiment, but only in the location that Bliss designated. Bliss believed he knew where the bullet was and would not listen to any possibility to the contrary, and therefore only permitted Bell to use his machine in that particular place. Bell moved the device across the president's chest where Bliss had instructed him to scan, but found nothing definitive. Bell thought he might have heard the sound to confirm a bullet's location, but he was unsure. He was concerned that a sound was being heard because of the expectation of one. Bliss, however, was convinced and went ahead to issue a statement saying the location was confirmed. Bell was doubtful. While he did hear something, it didn't match the other sounds he had heard in his earlier experiment. Bell was uneasy with the results. The next day, Bell went back to the White House, this time to confirm that all the metal had been removed from the bed and the area around it according to his instructions prior to the test. Turns out his instructions had not been followed. Beneath Garfield's horsehair mattress was another mattress made of metal springs. Bell was crushed, but believed this was the problem. In all the testing that they had done on the induction balance, it had only failed twice, both times as it was used on President Garfield. Bell wanted a third attempt, this time with the metal spring mattress removed, but Bliss made a public statement declaring Bell's invention a failure. But Bliss's continual probing to find the bullet didn't work either. Before he could do anything about it, however, Bell received a message that his wife, who was still in Boston, had fallen sick. He left Tainter in charge of the work in Washington while Bell went to Boston to be with his wife. He continued his work at his Boston laboratory. A week later, Bell's wife, named Mabel, gave birth to a son. They named him Edward. Edward, however, was premature and struggled to breathe. He died just 3 hours after he was born. Bell was not only grief-stricken, but he was burdened with the thought that he was responsible for his son's death, since he had not been there to be with his wife and care for her. Throwing himself into his work, Bell returned to modifying his induction balance. Just 3 days after Edward's death, he had more modifications to test, but Garfield was quickly deteriorating. Bell was in Boston with his grieving family, and Bliss would not allow Bell's assistant Tainter to test the device on Garfield. The only thing that Bell could do was to continue his work. He simply couldn't quit. But he knew that whatever would become of his induction balance, it would be too late to help Garfield. Garfield had stayed in the White House for weeks, his health sometimes rallying, but more often failing. On September 6th, he insisted on being moved to the New Jersey seaside. He had one last brief rally, but on September 19, 1881, 11 weeks after the shooting, James Garfield, died. Garfield's body lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda for 2 days and nights. The line to see the body of this beloved president stretched for more than a quarter mile. Bell was frustrated that his induction balance didn't work, and even after Garfield's death, continued to research the project. It was only during Garfield's autopsy that it was learned that the problem was not with the induction balance. It was because they were looking in the wrong place. Bliss did not permit Bell to use the device anywhere except where Bliss believed the bullet to be. But he was wrong. The bullet was not on Garfield's right side as Bliss believed. The path of the bullet had gone to the left, quite a distance from where he expected. One bullet had gone through Garfield's arm. A second bullet struck his back, breaking ribs but missing vital organs. The location of the bullet was not fatal. Garfield didn't die directly from the gunshot wounds. He died because of the septic poisoning, infections, and internal hemorrhage that followed. Bell was understandably concerned for his own reputation, but he also wanted the public to see the value and potential benefits in his induction balance. A month after Garfield's death, Bell continued to conduct more experiments and found bullets in many patients, successfully. In August of 1882, Alexander Graham Bell presented his findings from his experiments with the induction balance to the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He closed his remarks with these words: "I hope to continue these researches in the future, and certainly no man can have a higher incentive to renewed exertion than the hope of relieving suffering and saving life." Bell's induction balance went on to be the prototype for metal detectors that followed. In the years and wars to come, many lives were saved through use of Bell's induction balance, not only in finding bullets in bodies, but unexploded landmines as well. We can learn from the past, but we don't live there. Go be awesome today. Make your own history. But stick around for some more great stories from History Heights, like these.